Good Sunday morning and welcome to Inside Tennessee. I'm John Becker. They have been called America's best idea, but the future of our national parks is in grave danger, according to some people very close to those parks, including our own Great Smoky Mountains. To set the table for our political discussion, here is 10 News reporter Maria Guzman.
If investments bring returns over time, then people like Phil Francis say East Tennessee's great outdoors is worth every penny.
And without these attractions, I'm afraid that fewer people are going to come.
He worked more than 40 years with the National Park Service. He says managing a national park site is more complex than people think.
We have fires, we have bear-human encounters. We have people who do search and rescues, people who do the day-to-day maintenance.
But the future of NPS and jobs remains unclear. The President Trump's 2026 budget plan calls for a $1 billion cut to the National Park Service. Phil says a budget cut could hurt East Tennessee communities with a national park in their backyard.
The idea of building or creating a national park to help boost the economy has been wildly successful.
Numbers from NPS show visitors spent $55 billion in communities near national park sites in 2023, a record high number which supported over 400,000 jobs.
When we think about the things that are working, I think we all agree national parks is one of those things.
National Park Conservation Association says the cut can affect at least 350 national park sites.
I think about Pigeon Forge, I think about Gatlinburg, I think about I think about Townsend, I think about all of these gateway communities.
From East Tennessee's Black Bears to the faces who made the Smoky Mountains, advocates say the great outdoors make up the East Tennessee way of living.
The national parks are they're the heartbeat of East Tennessee. They make so many things happen here.
And you can see the resume of our guest this morning, Phil Francis, more than 40 years with the National Park Service, and you can see some of his stops along the way throughout his career. Mr. Francis, it's great to have you with us this morning. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
I'm going to introduce our panel along with my co-moderator, John North. We have Susan Richardson Williams, who is a Republican, and she runs her own PR firm.
Good morning, John.
Good morning. Don Bosch runs his own law firm, and he is a Democrat.
Good morning.
Good morning. Mr. Francis, you are here because this is such a timely subject. You had some emergency meetings last week in Washington. Explain why and what was discussed.
Well, everybody knows what's going on, I think. There's chaos in our country, chaos in the parks. Our employees are scared. You know, we're losing employees. Over the Smokies alone, could be losing hundreds, if not thousands of hundreds of employees. Blue Ridge Parkway, all the other parks are in the country. I think the total loss may be 2,000, 3,000 people across the country, and maybe more. And what we're hearing is this may be round one. There may be another round in the future.
Skeptics may say, hey, this sounds like the sky is falling. We've heard this before. What makes you so sure this time?
Well, you can see it on the ground. You can see people or talk to people, and they're very upset. We've had people, unfortunately, take their own lives, have been so concerned, former employees. This is serious. This is not the same. It's not the same as it was back in the 90s. It's not the same as it was back in the 80s. This is different.
Phil, if you could clarify for us, and it will be helpful for people watching us now to understand that here at WBIR, we have tried extremely hard to get some real numbers, to get a real sense of what's happening. But as you say, people are so scared they will not talk. Current personnel will not talk. If we get a response from the government, from Interior or the National Park Service, it's a canned statement that doesn't say a whole lot. So that's why it's important to hear from somebody like you who can talk about it. Can you give us an idea of what you think the impact is so far, just for example, on the Smokies? And we have other federal facilities beyond the Smokies in Tennessee, but what do you understand about the Smokies?
Sure, I've heard numbers like they've lost 20 people so far. But I need to put a little context here, because over the years, the Smokies have lost a lot of people because of lack of funding. So they're starting in a deficit, right? And now when you take away one person, that is a problem. 20 people, that's a bigger problem. And that's one of the reasons why they're closing campgrounds and picnic areas, while visitor centers won't be manned the way they used to be. You know, guided walks and talks, going to be different.
And for more context, 20 out of 200, 300 full-time employees?
I think that's probably close to 200. I don't know those numbers anymore. I used to, but I don't know those numbers anymore. I think it's probably a little less than that. I know when I was here, we lost a ton of maintenance employees. And we only had 5 interpreters or 6 interpretive staff for the entire park, and 12 million people coming to visit.
And what is that number down to today, if we know? Well, I think I'd heard something about we're down to 1. Have you heard that?
I have heard that. And if you go in a visitor center, you don't see often someone in a ranger uniform. So we've got volunteers. We've got Smoky's Life, the cooperating bookstores, and they sell goods, and they're really saving the day. And I don't know what we would do without the Friends of the Smokies.
Yeah, and I was going to ask about that, if they're saving, the park, because the funds they raise, it's just been incredible through the years. And
a nonprofit created in support of the park, but not affiliated with the federal government.
That's all that they were congratulated for $100 million over their life. That's a pretty good gift. And they've worked hard. They didn't have to do that.
Well, we've got to take a quick break. We'll talk more about that, get to Don and Susan's questions about the future and what this means for the National Park Service and for the Smokies right after this. Back on this Sunday morning, our guest this morning is Phil Francis, a veteran of the national parks. As John pointed out, we're hearing from him in part because it's very difficult to get specifics from the federal government about the future of the national parks right now. Susan?
Well, I want to talk about the coalition you're involved with. Okay. I looked at your website, and you all have written letters to congressmen, senators, to the leadership. And one of the concerns you have around the country is the oil and gas leases that are going on in the parks. Talk about that, and is it different now, or you're concerned about more oil and gas leases in the parks?
Oil and gas has certainly been a topic of great interest to the Secretary of the Interior for a long time. But this particular secretary, so far, is really focused on oil and gas. And they've talked about eliminating some of the acreage international monuments in some of our parks, and development next door, like next door to the Grand Canyon, uranium mining. That's not the best place, I don't think. And so that's really an issue. The other part of this has to do with air quality. You may remember years ago, when I came here, you could only see about 3 miles.
Right.
And let's
A lot of people don't realize
totally.
that. Newcomers have no idea that even like from here, it was smoky and smoggy, and you would think, where am I, L.A.?
When I started practicing law, and I had an office fairly high up in Plaza Tower, you couldn't see the mountains. And then suddenly over the years, they started to clear up and you could see it. And that's right. I remember in the late 80s, early 90s, you really couldn't see the mountains from Knoxville.
You couldn't, and the pH level and the fog that would drift across the mountains was 4.8.
And unfortunately, that may be coming back.
That's a little bit toward battery acid.
That's right.
So, but today, great improvements have been made. We still have a ways to go, but the impact of oil and gas continuing to burn fossil fuels is having an adverse impact to about 34% of the plants, or maybe it's 34 different plants, I think that's probably right, in the Smokies. And it causes aluminum to leach into the streams. And so, we were making good progress. And I hate to see us maybe turning around, heading the other way.
So, Phil, let's talk about sort of actual things that are going on in the park right now. You and I were talking before the show. What are there bathrooms shut down? Are there trails shut down? Are there campsites shut down? How is the average citizen, resident, visitor going to be affected this year should they go to the park? What should they be ready for if they just show up in the park?
They should. Key message: plan your trip. Determine where you're going. Tell someone where you're going. You know,
might not get
recognize
rescued, yeah.
you may not find a ranger, you may not find, you know, if you find a maintenance person you're having trouble, at least you can report it to someone. But, you know, with 2 million people going to each of the 4 areas in the park, you know, and you're not going to find a ranger there.
But are there campsites closed? Are there trails
Some
closed?
of the campsites have been closed. I hope they'll reopen. The trails, I think, are all open. The roads are open. The picnic areas, some of them have closed. But if the next round of cuts continues, and that's what we're hearing, that's what's being attempted, you know, it's going to be a really sad sight. Let me just give you a statistic. The budget cuts, $900 million.
Present budget just passed by the House. Yeah.
And that's just part of the cuts. It actually goes over $1 billion. If you look at the 433 national parks, and you take 900 million away, it's potential that we could lose 350 of the parks.
And lose them to who?
Good question.
Shut down?
I don't know.
Sounds like, again, and we talked a little bit before the show, is this some effort to privatize the national park system and let people with a lot of money make more money?
Some people surely think that, that's for sure.
Do you think that?
I think that's certainly a possibility, for sure. I mean, I can't say for sure that's what's going to happen, but I think that that's certainly a possibility.
What is the morale of park workers?
Really bad. You know, the national parks are voted America's favorite agency, federal agency. The morale of the Park Service is near the bottom of all of the agencies in our country. You know, and people are really upset, they're scared. You know, I mean, people are depressed. People wonder if they're going to have a job the next day. You know, some people can't afford not to have a job, right?
And they had a critical job. These weren't,
and they really
retired in place folks. These are folks that are really working for the betterment of the parks.
These people, we used to joke a little bit, not entirely a joke. We used to pay people in sunsets, you know, because we didn't pay our people huge amounts of money. And they did it because of the love of the job and the mission of the Park Service. And so it's going to be hard to retain people. I think there's going to be a problem with institutional memory. Not everything is written down somewhere that you might need to do or how to do it.
Sometimes if it is, it's getting purged.
Yeah, exactly right. And so I think there's going to be a gap. When we've been recruiting in the past, I remember times where we had 1,000 applications for a job. And now they may get 5, may get 4. So recruiting is going to be a real problem in retaining those folks. And you know, we all have run a business. We've all been in business, right? And we know that morale is good and productivity is good, you know, when you have a happy workforce and you've got some goals. And we've got the goals, but the goals are being changed.
We'll talk more about your goals as an organization and what's next in our last part of our conversation coming up right after this.
Okay.
Back on this Sunday morning, we're glad you're with us. John North.
Phil, sort of next steps, I want to turn to discussion about what are members of Congress telling you all. If you're hitting them up, we have a couple who here in Tennessee directly touch the national park. District 1, Diana Harshbarger. District 2, Tim Merchant of Knoxville. Are you approaching them? Are you hearing anything from them? We haven't said this, but it's $1 billion moneymaker for this region. What are they telling you?
Well, we've spoken to people from all over the country, you know, and some people are very much in favor of the national parks. So far, people seem to be following the leader of whichever party, and so
unfortunately, here it's the side that's trying to cut the budget.
Yeah,
cut the park budget.
Yeah, and so far there's been a few people who have crossed over and have changed their minds and want to support the national parks. They recognize that the return of a $4 billion budget of $55 billion makes good sense. You know?
Has Burchett or Harshbarger been any of those people that have come back?
I have personally written each one, and I get a standard letter back.
Well, I would say this, the Friends of the Smokies has some very important people involved in it.
Yeah.
And the Haslams, Gary Wade, people like that have been involved for a long time. If I were your organization, I would get in touch with them and ask them to contact your local reps and senators, because they certainly have a lot of influence. What else can people do besides contacting their congressman? And your coalition, do you have a lobbyist?
We do. We just hired our first one.
Well, that's probably a good
timing,
thing.
right?
It's a good thing.
Yeah, and he's making contacts. He's got experience. He's already met with around 55 people in the Congress, and he's been well received. But last night was really difficult because the budget was going to be cut so much.
Is your best case scenario now, knowing what's passed the House, it's in the Senate, we expect changes now of this big, beautiful bill, according to our president. What's your best case scenario? That U.S. senators carve out more for the national parks?
Well, that would be great. It's certainly needed, you know, and I could speak to the efficiencies that we've made over the years, and we've done a lot to do more with less. But I'm not real optimistic, to be honest with you. We really need $500 million for 5 years just to restore the positions that we've lost, just this one park.
Phil, they always say it's a lot easier to tear something down than build it up, but let's maybe look a little more long-term and optimistic. Let's say that this does get ripped out by its heart, and over the next 3 years, things change in Washington, and we know that. How quickly could it be built back to where it's sustainable again and the parks that we're used to now?
Depends what happens. You know, there's been talk about buildings like Main Interior in Washington and other office buildings around the country, visitor centers, that they would be closed and sold. You know, let's say, okay, then we get money to hire people back and put them where? I mean, it just doesn't make sense. I misspoke when I said $500 million for just this park. It means for the entire agency each year for 5 years.
$500 million is what you'd like to see restored. That would be
annually.
Annually.
Yes.
And you know, they say, gosh, that's a lot of money, and it is a lot of money. Don't get me wrong, but that's less than 1/15 of 1% of the federal
And you
budget.
look at the flip side again, what we mentioned earlier about the money that the parks bring in tourism and people and spending and hotels, and it really, $500 million brings in much more than that on the other side of the equation, doesn't it?
Absolutely. You know, you think about, it's not the employees aren't getting rich, right?
Right.
It's the neighboring communities that are benefiting the most. And I gave a talk one night, and I talked about this return on investment, and they said, well, who's getting that money? And I said, you are. You are. I mean, it's the communities. And so it's not going to be just our employees who are going to be hurting. It's the local economies are going to be affected all around the country.
Well, Phil Francis, we appreciate you joining us and giving us your expertise, because there's certainly more to come, and we hope to stay in touch and update our viewers on what does develop.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Appreciate it.
We're back with our talk around on this Sunday morning right after this. Back with our panel on this Sunday morning, Inside Tennessee, the politics of national parks. Susan, we were talking off camera. Where does this go from here? Might the Senate make some changes?
Well, everybody has their hand out, and everybody's concerned. You know, you've got Medicaid. I mean, you have everybody in the country's concerned about this, and they've just now hired a lobbyist. I hate to say, you know, but they should have had one a long time ago, so they didn't.
But he's
get
operating
in
on a
this situation.
$300,000 budget, his organization.
His organization is. I get that. But it's just, we're in that situation right now where it's going to be tough for the parks, I think, to get restored, just because there's so many needs out there and there's so many organizations that have their hand out.
Don?
Well, you know, the sad thing here is there's so many sad things about what's happening in Washington with this budget and these cuts. There are things that can be cut, I understand it, but we're giving tax breaks to millionaires and billionaires. But the thing about the parks is, we talked about the ROI, return on investment. This is something that if you just fund it at the level that it's at, or even close, it returns so much more in revenue. And folks, you want to make sure that your property taxes don't go up, that your sales taxes don't go up, that when your house is on fire, that somebody shows up. You need things like this, these secondary things that bring in tons of money to communities and that fund communities. Gatlinburg and Sevierville and Sevier County wouldn't be where they're at today without the park and the revenue it brings into their communities.
Let's go ahead.
I was just going to say, our area would be really hurting if the Smokies closed, or
call the people in your party that are doing this, Susan.
That's what I suggested to him.
They don't take my call.
Probably Western Carolina too.
Oh,
sure.
Shouldn't forget Western North Carolina.
The Cherokee Reservation. I mean, there's so many parts of this. But you think about Gatlinburg and Pigeon Forge without the park. Yeah, people might still come to ride a go-kart, but they basically come because of the mountains and the park.
They're the gateway to the Smokies.
Yeah.
Let's move to taxes, because Mayor Concannon, in a surprise move this week, saying, how about raising the sales tax? And let's show the website for our viewers. This is a great place to go if you want to learn more about it. And Ayanna's scrolling down here, and you'll see in part why the mayor made this case. You see Knox County in blue. It's lower in terms of sales tax revenue. I shouldn't say the sales tax we collect.
Sales tax rate, right?
Yeah, than the other surrounding counties. And that's one of the arguments she is making, to say, hey, let's bump it up, and we will benefit from visitors who will pay for expanding greenways, building more sidewalks. What do you make of this case, Don? And this will likely go to voters if City Council signs off, and you'll see that vote in November.
Well, taxes are never a popular subject, and they're difficult. Mayor Concannon is at the end of her term, so if you're going to, as a politician, if you're going to propose it, now is the time. I think it's a fair analysis. I still think we are so tax adverse, and I understand that, but this makes sense, but just because it makes sense doesn't mean it will pass. Even in the city, which tends to be a little more proactive and thoughtful about these things, I think it's a tough pitch, but maybe one we should consider.
Susan?
I'm glad I don't live in the city. But yeah, it would not pass in the county. There's no question about that. We are, the sales tax and property taxes are high. I mean, the property tax is lower than, as she said, some other places, but we have a very high sales tax.
One of the highest in the country.
In the country, we do. And
well, there's a reason
we
for
don't
that.
Have because we don't have a state income tax, right.
And there would be exemptions. Groceries
would be exempt.
A major part of that. And if you look at the dollars and cents, which I would encourage our viewers to do so, John, on some items that you might buy, it is a few cents more.
Yeah, the argument that Mayor Concannon makes is that, hey, you're looking at cents under $1 in terms of the kind of impact that you would have if you're buying like a shirt, for example. And I get that intellectually, but we live in Knox County, Tennessee.
And even Knoxville City, again, which is more progressive. Tax is just a bad word.
We're not living in a moment where people are feeling like they can be generous about anything.
That's true. That's very true. And everybody's concerned about inflation, the economy, and everything that's happening with cuts.
All right, well, we'll talk much more about it, especially with city council members who will be the ones who say, should this go to voters, we'll sign off on it. We're going to say goodbye for now on this Sunday morning and hope that you honor our military veterans, the fallen in particular, on Monday. This is a day that we reserve for them. So on this Memorial Day, we pay tribute to them. And we'll see you next week on Inside Tennessee.